Have you ever noticed how the people who irritate you the most, the ones who trigger you instantly, seem to possess specific qualities that just crawl under your skin? That arrogant coworker, that manipulative friend, that selfish family member. You can feel your blood pressure rising just thinking about them, can't you? But what if I told you something that might completely shatter your perception of reality? What if those people aren't your problem at all? What if they're actually mirrors, reflecting back the very parts of yourself you've spent your entire life trying to hide, deny, and bury so deep you've convinced yourself they don't exist? Today, we're going to venture into the darkest, most uncomfortable territory of the human psyche. We're going to talk about your shadow, that part of you that you've locked in the basement of your unconscious mind, hoping it would just disappear. Carl Jung dedicated much of his life to understanding this phenomenon, and what he discovered was both terrifying and liberating. He found that the parts of ourselves we reject don't disappear, they don't fade away. They grow stronger in the darkness, influencing our lives in ways we can't even see, sabotaging our relationships, our success, our happiness, all while we remain completely oblivious. But here's the powerful truth. Once you learn to face your shadow, to embrace those rejected parts, to integrate what you've been fighting against, you unlock a level of personal power most people never even know exists. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to show you the 5 stages of shadow integration. This isn't going to be comfortable. This isn't going to be easy. But if you're brave enough to stay with me, if you're courageous enough to look at what you've been avoiding, your life will never be the same. Are you ready to meet the monster you've been running from? Let's dive in. The first stage is recognizing your projections, understanding that what you hate in others lives in you. This is perhaps the most difficult pill to swallow. Your ego will fight this with everything it has, because your ego's entire job is to maintain the image you have of yourself as good, moral, acceptable. Think about the last time someone really made your blood boil. Maybe it was someone bragging about their accomplishments, and you felt this surge of disgust. How arrogant, you thought, how self-absorbed, how desperate for attention. Or maybe it was someone being passive and indecisive, and you felt contempt. How weak, you thought, how pathetic. Why can't they just stand up for themselves? Here's what Jung discovered. If someone's behavior simply didn't align with your values, you'd feel neutral or mildly disapproving. You'd observe it and move on. But when something triggers you, when it creates an emotional charge, when you can't stop thinking about it, when you feel compelled to talk about it, to criticize it, to make sure if everyone knows how wrong that person is, that's not about them. That's about you. That's your shadow talking. That person is exhibiting a quality that exists within you, but that you've deemed unacceptable. So you buried it. You exiled it from your conscious awareness. And now, when you see it in someone else, your psyche freaks out. It's like seeing a ghost of the part of yourself you killed. Let me give you a real example. Imagine you pride yourself on being humble and modest. You were raised to believe that talking about your achievements is tacky and boastful. So you learn to minimize yourself, to deflect compliments, to hide your light. You buried your natural desire for recognition and validation deep in your shadow. Now, when you encounter someone who freely celebrates their success, who posts their wins on social media, who owns their accomplishments without apology, you feel triggered. You judge them harshly. But that judgment isn't about them. It's about the part of you that desperately wants recognition but isn't allowed to ask for it. The part that feels unseen and unappreciated but has been trained to stay silent. That person is living out your shadow. They're doing what you forbid yourself from doing. And that creates rage. Or consider the opposite. Maybe you're someone who prides yourself on being strong and independent. You never ask for help. You never show vulnerability. You handle everything on your own. That's your identity. So you buried your neediness, your vulnerability, your desire for support. Then you meet someone who's openly needy, who asks for help frequently, who shows their weakness without shame. And you feel contempt. How can they be so dependent, so weak? But again, that's your shadow. That person is expressing needs that you have but won't acknowledge. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This is the key. Your triggers are treasure maps. Every person who irritates you is showing you a rejected part of yourself.
Every quality you despise in others is a quality you possess but won't admit. This is why the first stage is so crucial. You have to develop the awareness to catch yourself in the act of projection, to notice when you're triggered and ask, what part of me am I seeing in this person? What am I rejecting in myself that they're reflecting back to me? The second stage is admitting your darkness, acknowledging the unacceptable parts. Once you start recognizing your projections, the real work begins, because now you have to do something that goes against everything you've been taught. You have to admit that you're not who you think you are, that the story you've been telling yourself about being a good person, a moral person, a person without those ugly qualities, is incomplete.
Most people can't do this. Their ego won't allow it. They'd rather keep projecting, keep blaming, keep pointing fingers at everyone else than admit they have darkness within them. But Jung understood that this admission is essential for psychological wholeness. He said, we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Let's get specific. What are the qualities you judge most harshly in others? Write them down mentally right now. Arrogance, selfishness, laziness, dishonesty, aggression, weakness, neediness, greed, jealousy, cruelty. Whatever qualities made that list, I have news for you. You possess all of them. Not in the exaggerated way you see them in others, but they exist within you, and they've been influencing your behavior without your awareness. The selfish part of you that you've denied is why you sometimes feel resentful when you give to others.
Because you're giving from obligation, not genuine generosity, but you can't admit that. The aggressive part that you've buried is why you sometimes use passive-aggressive tactics instead of direct communication. The aggression is there, it's just coming out sideways because you won't own it. The weak part you've rejected is why you overcompensate with strength, working yourself to exhaustion to prove you don't need anyone. This stage requires brutal honesty, and it's painful, because you're shattering the image you have of yourself. The good person mask is cracking, and underneath it, you're finding all the things you swore you weren't. You're finding the capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for cowardice, for all the human qualities you've been judging in others. Here's what you need to understand. Having these qualities doesn't make you a bad person.
It makes you a complete person. It makes you human. Every human being on this planet has a shadow. Every single one. The difference between conscious people and unconscious people isn't that conscious people don't have darkness, it's that they're aware of it. They've looked at it, they've admitted it, and because they're aware of it, they have choice over it. Unconscious people think they're good, but their shadow runs their life from behind the scenes. Conscious people know they're capable of darkness, and that awareness gives them power over it. So in this stage, you sit with the discomfort of admitting your full humanity, the light and the dark, the acceptable and the unacceptable, all of it. The third stage is understanding where your shadow came from, tracing it back to its origin.
Your shadow wasn't born with you. You weren't born judging parts of yourself as unacceptable. You came into this world whole, expressing your full range of human emotions and behaviors without shame. But then conditioning happened. Your parents, your culture, your religion, your education, they all had rules about what was acceptable and what wasn't. And anything that didn't fit, anything that got you punished or rejected or shamed, you learned to hide. Jung called this the creation of the persona, the mask we wear to be acceptable to society. And the shadow is everything that didn't make it into the persona, everything that got left behind. Think back to your childhood. When did you learn that certain parts of you were bad? Maybe you expressed anger, and you were told, "We don't get angry in this family." Anger is ugly. So you learned that anger was unacceptable. You buried it. But the anger didn't disappear. It went into your shadow. Now, as an adult, you might be someone who never expresses anger directly, but you're secretly resentful. You're passive-aggressive. You have mysterious health issues that doctors can't explain. Because that repressed anger is still there, expressing itself in ways you can't see. Or maybe you were naturally exuberant and expressive as a child. You sang loudly, you danced, you took up space.
and someone said, "Stop being so loud. Stop drawing attention to yourself. People will think you're showing off." So you learned that expressiveness was bad. You dimmed your light. You made yourself small. And now, as an adult, you judge people who are expressive. You call them attention seekers.
Because they're doing what you forbid yourself from doing. Or maybe you were sensitive and emotional, and you were told, "Toughen up. Stop being so sensitive. The world will eat you alive if you're like this." So you learned that sensitivity was weakness. You built walls. You numbed yourself. And now you judge emotional people as weak or manipulative because they're expressing the vulnerability you had to kill. Understanding where your shadow came from creates compassion, both for yourself and for others. You realize you didn't choose to bury these parts. You did it to survive, to be loved, to be accepted, to avoid pain. You are a child doing the best you could with the information and support you had. But here's the crucial part. Just because you understand where it came from doesn't mean you have to keep living with those limitations.
You're not a child anymore. You don't need that protection anymore. You can start reclaiming the exiled parts, and that's where the real transformation begins. In this stage, you might want to do some deep reflection or journaling. Ask yourself, what qualities did I learn were unacceptable in my family? What emotions was I not allowed to express? What behaviors got me punished or shamed? What parts of my natural self did I have to hide to be loved? The answers to these questions will illuminate your shadow like a flashlight in a dark room, and once you can see what's there, you can start working with it. The fourth stage is integrating your shadow, bringing the rejected parts back home. This is where shadow work stops being theoretical and becomes practical.
This is where you actively start reclaiming the parts of yourself you exiled. Integration doesn't mean acting out your shadow in destructive ways. It doesn't mean if you discover you have anger in your shadow, you should start yelling at everyone. That's not integration. That's still being controlled by the shadow, just in a different way. Integration means acknowledging the quality exists within you, understanding its message, and finding healthy ways to express it. Let's take that anger example. If you've repressed anger your whole life, integration means first admitting, yes, I have anger. I get angry. That's human and acceptable. Then you ask, what is my anger trying to tell me? What boundary has been crossed? What need is not being met? Anger, when properly understood, is a signal that something is wrong. It's energy for change. So healthy integration of your anger shadow might look like learning to set boundaries, learning to say no, learning to express disagreement without aggression, but with firmness. You're not becoming an angry person. You're becoming a person who acknowledges anger and uses it constructively. Or take the selfish quality that many people have buried in their shadow. If you pride yourself on being selfless and giving, but you're secretly resentful and exhausted, you probably have a selfish shadow. Integration means admitting, yes, I have selfish desires. I want things for myself. That doesn't make me a bad person. It makes me human. Then you start honoring those desires. You start asking, what do I want? What do I need? And you give yourself permission to pursue those things without guilt. You're not becoming a selfish person. You're becoming a person who has healthy self-interest, who knows that you can't pour from an empty cup, who understands that taking care of yourself enables you to genuinely care for others. Jung believed that integrating the shadow created wholeness, that when you stop fragmenting yourself into good parts and bad parts, when you accept your full humanity, you become psychologically complete, and that completeness gives you authentic power, the power of someone who's not hiding anything, who's not performing, who's integrated all the parts into one coherent whole. Here's what happens as you integrate your shadow. You become less judgmental of others, because you've acknowledged that you have all the qualities you used to judge. You have more compassion. You stop taking things personally. When someone is being difficult, you understand they're probably acting from their own shadow. It's not about you. You have more energy, because you're not using energy to repress parts of yourself anymore. You're not maintaining the facade. You become more creative, because creativity requires access to the full range of human experience, including the dark parts. You become more authentic in relationships, because you're not hiding half of yourself anymore. You're showing up whole. And paradoxically, you become a better person, not by denying your capacity for darkness, but by acknowledging it and choosing light anyway. There's a huge difference between someone who's never been tempted and someone who faces temptation and chooses differently. The second person has real virtue, real strength. That's what shadow integration creates. The fifth and final stage is living with shadow awareness.
Maintaining vigilance without obsession. Shadow work isn't a one-time thing. It's not like you do it once and you're done. Your shadow will continue to reveal itself throughout your life. New layers will emerge, new projections will appear, new triggers will activate. Living with shadow awareness means you've developed a practice of checking in with yourself regularly. When you notice a strong emotional reaction to someone, you pause and ask, what am I seeing? What's mine and what's theirs? You've become curious rather than reactive. You've developed what Jung called the observing ego, the part of you that can watch yourself without judgment, that can notice your patterns, your triggers, your projections. This observing ego is like having an internal witness that keeps you honest. You also develop a relationship with your shadow.
Instead of seeing it as an enemy to be conquered, you see it as a part of yourself that holds valuable information. Maybe you even start dialoguing with it. When you feel a shadow quality arising, instead of pushing it away, you ask, what are you trying to tell me? What do you need? What wound are you protecting? This creates an internal collaboration rather than an internal war. And you start noticing how your shadow shows up in your dreams. Jung believed dreams were the royal road to the unconscious, that the figures in your dreams, especially the threatening or disturbing ones, are often shadow representations. The monster chasing you in your dream is probably a part of yourself you're running from. The criminal, the villain, the dark figure, that's your shadow trying to get your attention.
As you develop shadow awareness, you start working with your dreams, recording them, reflecting on them, asking what parts of yourself they're revealing. Living with shadow awareness also means you become more tolerant of paradox. You can hold two seemingly contradictory truths at the same time. You're a good person, and you're capable of harm. You're generous, and you're selfish. You're strong, and you're weak. You're confident, and you're insecure. Instead of seeing these as contradictions, you see them as the full spectrum of being human. You stop trying to be one-dimensional. You embrace your complexity. And here's something beautiful that happens. You start seeing the gold in your shadow. Jung talked about this. He said the shadow doesn't just contain the bad things we've rejected. It also contains unrealized potential.
Gifts we didn't develop, strengths we didn't claim. Because sometimes we bury not just our darkness, but also our light. Maybe you buried your confidence because you were afraid of being seen as arrogant. Maybe you buried your power because you were afraid of threatening others. Maybe you buried your sexuality because you were taught it was shameful. Maybe you buried your ambition because you were told it wasn't spiritual or humble. All of that is in your shadow too. And when you do shadow work, you reclaim not just the difficult parts, but also these golden parts, the strengths you didn't know you had, the gifts you were sitting on. This is why Jung said that the shadow is 90% gold, that most of what we've rejected about ourselves is actually valuable. It just needed to be acknowledged and integrated consciously rather than acted out unconsciously. Now let's talk about what all of this means for your actual life, for your relationships, your work, your purpose. Because shadow work isn't just navel-gazing psychology. It has real-world implications. In your relationships, shadow work is transformative. Most relationship conflicts are shadow projections. You're fighting with your partner about something, but the real issue is the shadow quality they're triggering in you. When you start doing your own shadow work, you stop blaming your partner for your triggers. You take responsibility for your own psychological material. This doesn't mean your partner can't do hurtful things or that you should accept bad behavior. It means you can distinguish between what's actually happening and what you're projecting onto the situation. You can address real issues from a grounded place rather than a triggered place. And something interesting happens. When you integrate your shadow, you attract different people. Or the same people start showing up differently because you're not unconsciously pulling for people to act out your shadow anymore. You're not creating the same dramas over and over. In your work, shadow integration unlocks creativity in leadership. When you're not using energy to maintain a persona, to keep certain parts hidden, you have more energy for actual creation. Your work becomes more authentic because it's coming from your whole self, not just the acceptable parts. And if you're in any kind of leadership role, shadow awareness is essential. Unconscious leaders act out their shadow on their teams. They're tyrannical or they're passive. They're grandiose or they're self-deprecating. They create toxic cultures without even realizing it. But a leader who's done shadow work brings consciousness to their role. They know their triggers. They know their weak spots. They know where they tend to project. And that awareness makes them exponentially more effective and more trustworthy. In terms of your life purpose, shadow integration is crucial because your purpose isn't just in your light, it's also in your darkness. Sometimes the thing you're meant to contribute to the world is directly related to your shadow. The wound you've been hiding is the thing that, once healed and integrated, becomes your medicine for others. Jung called this the wounded healer archetype, the person who's been through the darkness and comes out the other side with wisdom to share.
Maybe your shadow contains anger and rebellion, and once you integrate it, you become an activist or advocate. You channel that energy into fighting injustice. Maybe your shadow contains vulnerability and sensitivity, and once you integrate it, you become a therapist or counselor. You use your depth of feeling to help others navigate theirs. Maybe your shadow contains power and ambition, and once you integrate it, you step into leadership. You build the thing you've been dreaming about, but were too afraid to claim. Your shadow isn't just the monster in the basement, it's also the treasure in the cave, and you have to go into the dark to retrieve it. Let me share something with you that most people don't want to hear. You will never fully eliminate your shadow. This isn't a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be worked with. As long as you're human, as long as you're living in a society with norms and expectations, you will have parts of yourself that don't fit perfectly, parts that need to be modulated or contained in certain contexts. That's normal. That's healthy. The goal isn't to express everything all the time without filter. The goal is awareness, consciousness, choice. An unconscious person acts out their shadow and has no idea they're doing it. They sabotage their relationships and blame the other person. They undermine their own success and call it bad luck. They project their issues onto the world and live in a victim mentality. A conscious person knows their shadow. They see it. They work with it.
And when it shows up, they recognize it and make a choice about how to respond. That's the difference. That's the transformation. And it's available to you right now if you're willing to do the work. Right now, pause this video for just a moment. Think about the person who irritates you most in your life. Picture their face. Feel that irritation rising. Now ask yourself honestly, what quality do they have that I've rejected in myself? What are they showing me about my own shadow? Sit with that question. Let the answer come. It might not be comfortable. In fact, it probably won't be. But that discomfort is the doorway to growth, to integration, to wholeness. If you're serious about this work, if you're committed to becoming conscious, go down to the comments and write this exact phrase.
I see my shadow, and I'm ready to integrate. No more projections, no more hiding. This isn't just a comment. It's a declaration of intent. It's you telling your unconscious mind that you're ready to do this work, that you're not going to keep running from the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. And while you're down there, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because shadow work is deep work. It's ongoing work, and you need consistent reminders, tools, and guidance to stay on this path. Every video we create is designed to support your journey towards psychological wholeness and authentic power. Here's what I want you to understand. The fact that you're watching this video, the fact that you've stayed with me through this uncomfortable exploration says something significant about you. Most people will never do this work. They'll live their entire lives projecting their shadow onto others, blaming the world for their internal conflicts, never realizing that the person they're fighting is themselves. But you're different. You're here. You're listening. You're willing to look at the uncomfortable truth. That willingness is rare. It's valuable. And it's the beginning of real transformation. Jung said that the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Read that again. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. This means that your unintegrated shadow doesn't just sit quietly in your unconscious. It creates your external reality. It attracts situations and people that force you to confront what you're avoiding. It sabotages your success right when you're about to break through.
It destroys relationships that could have been beautiful. It keeps you stuck in patterns you swore you'd never repeat. Your shadow, left unconscious, becomes your fate. But when you make it conscious, when you integrate it, you take back your power. You stop unconsciously creating the same problems over and over. You start making different choices, living differently, being different. This is why shadow work is the most powerful work you can do. It's not about positive thinking or visualization or affirmations. It's about going into the depths, facing what's there, and bringing it into the light of consciousness. It's about becoming whole, and wholeness is the foundation of everything else. You can't build a meaningful life on a fragmented psyche. You can't have authentic relationships if you're projecting half your psyche onto other people. You can't fulfill your purpose if you're using all your energy to repress parts of yourself. Shadow work is the foundation. Do this work first, and everything else becomes possible. Let me give you some practical steps you can start taking today. First, start a trigger journal. Every time someone or something triggers you emotionally, write it down. Who was it? What did they do? What quality were they displaying? How did it make you feel? Then ask, do I have this quality in me? Where have I rejected this in myself? Be honest. Your ego will want to defend and deny. Let it speak, then look deeper. Second, practice what Jung called active imagination. Sit quietly and invite your shadow to speak. Imagine the quality you've been rejecting as a figure or character.
Have a dialogue with it. Ask it questions. What do you want? What do you need? What are you trying to protect me from? This might sound strange, but it's incredibly powerful. Your shadow has intelligence. It has reasons for being there. Listen to it. Third, pay attention to your dreams. Keep a dream journal by your bed. When you wake up, write down whatever you remember, no matter how fragmented or bizarre. Look for recurring themes, threatening figures, situations where you're hiding or being chased. These are shadow material. Your unconscious is trying to show you what you need to see. Fourth, do the opposite exercise. If you've been one-sided in your personality, consciously practice the opposite quality in small, safe ways. If you're always agreeable, practice disagreeing about something minor.
If you're always strong, practice asking for help with something small. If you're always serious, practice being playful. This isn't about becoming a different person. It's about expanding your range, integrating the parts you've cut off. Fifth, find a safe container for shadow work. This might be therapy, a trusted friend who's also doing this work, a men's group or women's circle, or a journal that no one else will read. You need a place where you can be completely honest about your darkness without fear of judgment. Shadow work requires vulnerability. You can't do it alone, and you can't do it in spaces that aren't safe. And sixth, practice self-compassion. Shadow work brings up shame. You're going to see parts of yourself you don't like. You're going to realize you've been acting out patterns you judged in others. You're going to feel hypocritical and flawed. That's normal. That's part of the process. Don't beat yourself up. Remember, everyone has a shadow. You're not uniquely flawed. You're typically human. The difference is you're doing something about it. You're making the unconscious conscious. That takes courage. Honor that. As we come toward the end of this exploration, I want to leave you with a final thought. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's not the monster under the bed that needs to be killed. It's a part of you that's been exiled, sitting in the dark, waiting to be welcomed home. Every quality in your shadow, even the ones that seem irredeemably dark, has a gift for you. Anger carries the gift of boundaries and self-protection. Selfishness carries the gift of self-care and knowing your worth. Arrogance carries the gift of confidence and self-belief. Weakness carries the gift of vulnerability and connection. Cruelty carries the gift of discernment and the ability to cut away what doesn't serve. Even the darkest shadows carry light. You just have to be willing to look, to integrate, to bring them home. Jung spent his life exploring the shadow, because he understood it was the key to human wholeness. He knew that we can't transcend what we won't acknowledge. We can't integrate what we keep denying. And we can't become whole if we're constantly at war with parts of ourselves. The path to wholeness runs directly through the shadow. There's no way around it. You can try to bypass it with spiritual practices, with achievement, with relationships, with substances, with endless distraction.
But eventually, life will bring you face to face with your shadow, through a crisis, a breakdown, a loss, a confrontation, and you'll have a choice to keep running or to finally turn around and look at what's been chasing you. I'm inviting you to make that choice now, consciously, voluntarily, before life forces it on you. To do shadow work not because you have to, but because you're ready, because you're tired of the patterns, tired of the projections, tired of fighting with yourself. You want wholeness, you want integration, you want to live from your full power, not just the acceptable parts. That's what this work offers. Not perfection, not becoming a saint, but becoming complete, becoming human in the fullest sense, light and dark, conscious and integrated.
Whole. So here's my challenge to you. For the next 7 days, commit to shadow awareness. Every single day, notice when you get triggered. Notice when you judge someone harshly. Notice when you have a strong reaction. And in that moment, pause, breathe, and ask, what am I seeing? What's mine here? Don't judge yourself for the answer. Just notice. Just become aware. That's all. 7 days of awareness. See what shifts. See what reveals itself. See how your relationships change when you stop projecting. And at the end of those 7 days, come back to this video. Watch it again. See what you hear differently now that you've been practicing. Because shadow work is not a one-time event. It's a practice, a lifelong practice of becoming more conscious, more integrated, more whole. Before I let you go, one more time, head down to the comments, write this: my shadow is not my enemy. Integration begins now. Let that be your commitment, your declaration, your first step on this powerful path. And smash that subscribe button if you're serious about this journey. This channel is dedicated to helping people like you do the deep psychological and spiritual work that creates real transformation. Every video is another tool, another map, another companion on the journey toward wholeness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being brave enough to look at your shadow. Thank you for choosing consciousness over avoidance. I see the work you're doing. I honor it. And I'm walking this path right alongside you. Until next time, keep looking into the darkness.
Keep integrating what you find there. Keep becoming whole. Because the world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. The world needs people who are courageously, authentically, completely human. And that's exactly what you're becoming.